Hi guys, I'm going to talk you through this drawing task. We are going to provide you with a range of imagery that you can select and work from. Some of it is from the internet, like this engine. I don't have access to such, so I have found this specifically online and found a good viewpoint. Some of it is from the Museum of Science and Industry. These are photographs taken by people in the department over the years. They're nice and clear, and so you'd be able to work from them with ease. We are going to give you a viewfinder. Now this is going to be a piece of black card with a hole cut in it. The hole has an aperture of 8 by 8 centimetres. Yours will have been cut on the laser, mine has been hand cut. The reference material will be laid out for you in the classroom and you'll be able to have a good look at it for a few minutes before you make your selection. Now you may have a preconceived idea about the direction of your project. And within your project we want to see some quality drawing. So we are encouraging you to pick something you think will fit, even though it is not a perfect fit at this stage. It might influence your choices later. Now, as you're looking at the reference material given you, you might wonder what's easy and what's hard. I'm going to take the viewfinder to illustrate this. If I pop the viewfinder up here, within this section, I have a series of concentric circles. That's a tricky thing to do unless I've got a compass in my hand. It's got regular teeth around it, and whilst it's a bit grubby and mucky, it's still quite regular in its section. So if you wanted to do something from this image, I might pull it over here. I've now got one arc to deal with here, another one there, some smaller components, but there's a lot less in terms of complexity and regularity in this particular image. If I move across to a completely different image, here I might want to do something with pipes, and while slightly out of focus, if I pop my viewfinder on here and move it around, we don't want to do something that's a completely dull section with nothing in it. You want a focus for your drawing. I don't fancy drawing that bit, but this bit with this piece over the top of these sections I think is visually quite interesting. So ideally you want to work rapidly, you want to select your image you want to work from, and then with the viewfinder position it exactly where you want it. So I'm going to position this exactly where I want it. I'm looking at the composition. Do I want to draw these components? Yes or no? If I pull it down, no, I think they're actually better with it. I have a little piece of masking tape, so I'm going to secure the viewfinder in the correct position. Now to draw the shape I'm going to work into, I could go and get myself a ruler and measure an 8 by 8 centimetres square, the 90-degree corner, or equally I could just put my piece of paper underneath it, quality cartridge only please, and I could just create it like a stencil. The shape is on here already. Now I'm allowed to draw onto the viewfinder and I'm allowed to put little marks on to help me measure where components just meet the boundary, a little bit like a grid drawing. You can also, if you want to, draw a grid or a crosshair onto your reference material. You don't want to do it with something too chunky that you lose detail. Now, if I want to, I can use a strip of paper to take measurements. Remember, I prefer to do this than use a ruler because you don't need to convert it into numbers. It's just about transposing information. You can have as many strips of paper as you like. And I just put a series of marks on just to get me going. So you can see I'm looking at where things just come to the boundary of the image. I drew longer lines at the top just then because that's going to help me distinguish which mark I'm actually using here. I might actually look at where that circle meets it there. I'm going to look as well at that point right in the middle of the image, just because I think it would be useful to know where some middle points are going to be. So when you're plotting a graph, it's a similar thing, X and Y axis, you're just working out where things are. Now, you can start with straight lines, you can start working with curved lines. I'm going to start with a tricky one, this curved one. It comes up here, around there. And remember, your underdrawing is light. When you're doing your working out, nice and light. Don't be tempted to go heavy, because if you make a mistake, you're going to be rubbing it out and it's going to show through. Now, I started drawing and I feel confident now that I want this roughly parallel with that. I know that point comes down here. I know that it gets wider just above there. I'm using my finger on here to guide me. I want to know how far that across is there. I've already got a mark that's similar. So all I'd do is start working out a bit of a line drawing, plotting shape. Like I say, nice and light in case I make any significant errors at this stage. This will help you understand what's going on in your image as well. So it is about understanding. When we trace base, sometimes we don't think about the construction of something, but in this process, we're forced to really think about it. I'll come back to you in a few minutes. So I've spent a little time drawing it out, and it's not the most accurate drawing I've done in the world because I'm time pressured and I've drawn it fairly rapidly. If you notice, this section might not be quite as big as that bit. That is definitely narrower and shorter than that section. I think this whole thing got shunted over a little bit, but it will do the job. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start adding some tone, and I'm going to start with my tonal range, and I want to go from very, very dark tone right the way through to the white of the paper. Remember this, when we're shading, we can alter our pressure. Now we can emphasize and extend the tonal range in the image if it's quite light. So we're using the white of the paper and we're using the darkest tone we can achieve. So the first thing I'm going to do in my tonal map is go really heavy in areas that are dark. So the darker it is, the heavier I'm going to go. Nice sharp pencil on this. I'm actually only working at the moment with an HB because that's all I have to hand, but a 2B would be good for it. Remember, 2B does go a little bit grainy though, so you might like the control of the HB. So as the shadow from this central section comes over here, it's very, very dark. It defines the edge, so I'm not drawing an outline, I'm just drawing a boundary between these sections and putting some big shading in. Very, very dark, nice and controlled. And I'll keep doing that. I'll keep looking for really, really dark areas and make some minor modifications to my drawing as I go. But really dark areas, if it's a solid fill black section, just go for it. So hopefully in that fast forward clip, what you've seen me do is start working around really, really dark areas, and I'm building up those dark areas. So I have a real plan about how I'm tackling this tone. So I'm not going to complete the whole image because it is a demonstration. I'm now going to look at some midtones. So these areas in here are darker than these areas. So onto the arc there, I can see it's slightly darker there. There's a little bit of texture into here, so I can work with quite an angular mark if it suits me. That is my drawing style. I am quite angular, but I'm working with the tip of the pencil. I'm trying to put control into this, even if it's textural and has marks in it. There's a little bit of shadow down this side here. Remember, the light is coming from there because the shadows are consistently from this object down here. I've gone with a more hatched line into there, and it's getting a bit lighter, so I'm just doing a little bit more work on it getting lighter. I can build up that tone. On the shoulder of this pit section, as it comes down here, there's a change in tone. Into this section as it comes down. This section, I think, in profile is rounded there, so I'm going to think about how that looks and how you'd shade it. So it's darker at this side, but it doesn't continue down there. It gets darker at the bottom, because it's spherical this way as well in an arc that way. So it's darker down here. I'm building up some tone into that section. Bit of texture in the old metal. And I can see a similar thing going on here. I've already started work on that. There's a little bit of like a section where something like a screw set in there. So I'm really thinking about these different sections and how to describe them. This section in the end here, there's just a bit of a line between that section and the bit beyond it, because this is all on this central axis. So I'm going to keep working, and because I'm working in a very systematic way, I have real focus. I know what I'm doing. I'm thinking I'll deal with this whole section of it being darker and getting lighter into there, a little bit of texture. I might as well do this bit now here. It's more texture into that area. There's like a cable tie that wraps around here. It's got quite a lot of light on it just there. It's actually slightly further over, but I've done it in a slightly wrong place, but I think I can get away with it. That's art, artistic license sometimes. As long as it's describing and doing a reasonable job, that's sometimes what we need. So it's darker into there. It's a mid-tone in there, which is darker. This section or that one, slightly darker onto here. So I'm just going to slightly darken the line. So I'm working the initial outlines in and blending. Different teachers have different approaches, so you might have seen other approaches. Use what you know. Remember, we are looking for your work. We're not looking for an absolute photographic copy. We're looking to see how you've interpreted it. Accuracy and shape will be good. Obviously, description of form and surface through tone, texture, mark making. Now down this side, as it's rounded this way, it's a little bit darker just down this side. Not very dark. Maybe that needs to be a bit darker. So I'm making an adjustment at the other side and I think about it. I'm going to come back to this section I was working on before, using that formula that I've used in the other sections of it. To make this bit stand out, I'm shading in around it. I might have gone a bit darker than is truly there. Remember, ultimately no one's ever going to see your drawing and the reference material side by side. So as long as it's describing and doing a reasonable job, there won't be that direct comparison between those two elements. In the final stage, I'll recap on the whole process. Using the viewfinder, I selected a section that I wanted to work on and used the viewfinder to boundary off the area so I could focus solely on it. I drew the shape using the viewfinder as a template, and then I mapped out the areas and sections through a light underdrawing, repositioning and moving things around. I used a piece of paper that's now got lots of little marks on it, and I've turned it over where I've used it's getting a bit too busy, to help me position things. Sometimes you can shape sketch and just kind of work out where something is with rough shapes. Other times that is a useful construction technique. I then started looking for the darkest tones, so I worked systematically. I put the darkest tones in first in these areas where there are shadows. I worked in with mid-tone. I then have left the lighter areas and the white of the paper. So I've gone from dark to the white of the paper. As I've worked, my hands were rubbed on it and it smudged a little bit. So I might take a rubber, a very messy rubber as it happens, and I could just dab it and rub some highlights back in. If I take too much out, obviously I can just draw back onto the surface, but I can lift some of the tones off. So I'm not making corrections, I'm using the rubber as a tool. Remember, with tone, you can actually do this with line. You can do even line and you can do weighted line. A weighted line is where you press harder and you get lighter. So sometimes weighting to the lines looks quite interesting and breaks up just very, very solid lines. I've thought about tone and volume as I've been drawing. So onto a cylinder-based shape, I've thought if the light is hitting it here, it's going to be darker down there. I've observed these things in the work and I've considered the application of them. If it's hitting something spherical, remember there'll be a lighter area, but again there'll be a gradient like there is on a rounded surface between dark and light. If it is a faceted object with different planes, the light will hit each surface in a different way. So if the light is hitting here, this one will be clearly darker, and you'll see a distinct step between those two areas. The other thing I've considered is the surface texture. So some of these images have less of this, but in this one there's texture into the metal, and I've considered how I can convey that. This is not the most accurate description of that. I've used little dashes, marks, scribbles, dots to convey there is some surface texture onto there. You could also look at directional line onto this section here to convey the volume. I've put a little bit of line into it, suggesting that it is formed this way. You can consider those things and incorporate any of your previous knowledge. When you look at your work right at the very end, if you take your viewfinder, it should fit just over your image, so you can see your image fully in isolation at the end of the task in a little frame, and you are ready to submit. We will go on and develop these drawings later, and we will go on and add to them and work from them within future tasks.